Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance by voices within the independent Catholic movement. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. And now, meet your hosts, Reverend Dr. Trish Sullivan-Bonney and Reverend Dr. Jamie Matthias.
Welcome to Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Father Jamie Matthias.
And I am Reverend Trish Sullivan-Bonney.
And for this episode, we are excited to welcome a special guest, Reverend Trish.
Okay, so this guest, this is a very special guest to me. So one of the things about being active in a community of faith, as I was for many years raising my family, is you get to not only have your kids, but you get to have these other amazing young people in your life. And I first met Grace Curtis, who is our guest today, when she was a sophomore in high school. So I'm thinking maybe like 15, 16, when she was having questions about participating in the sacrament of confirmation. And why was she thinking about that? Well, because she is a very well-formed, faithful person, first and foremost. She has fabulous intellect, and she's a thinker. And she was really asking herself some fundamental questions about her place in the Roman Catholic system as a woman. And what did it mean to be confirmed? Now, I'll have to say that Grace is not the first thinking young woman who sought me out and had coffee with me around this question. There were a few, but it was the beginning of our friendship. And I really want to say that from the beginning, it was a friendship. Even though there's a big generational difference, I am probably older than her mom. Grace later became part of a circle called the Upper Room, which was our faith formation for juniors and seniors, because, they were the upperclassmen. So they got to go to the upper room. And we had a very freewheeling format. We just talked about whatever they wanted to talk about. If they wanted to talk about, meditation and Buddhism, we did that. And we talked about Christian mysticism as well. We just went from topic to topic, and it was driven by the interests of our young people. And so in those years, I got to know the fabulous Grace, and I cherish her. She was present when I was ordained 8 years ago. She was part of the entire community laying on their hands, and it was a very elevated, exalted moment for me when Grace blessed me. So this is my fabulous friend Grace. And Grace, you could say a little bit about like where you are and anything about your life that you want to share with our listeners, and then I'll tell them about how this topic came up.
Sure. I think that was a great introduction. And frankly, I think your recollection of that period of my life is better than mine sometimes. No, I was a student of yours when I was going through the confirmation process. I'm from Minnesota, where you obviously still live. And now I live out in Washington, D.C. With my cat and my friends and loved ones. And so really excited to be here and chat about my experience, both with the church and outside of the church, and the things that I've brought with me into adulthood, and traditions that I've sort of made my own.
I love it. So Grace and I, when she comes into town, sometimes I get to grab her for coffee. We have a very cool historic building that's our coffee shop here in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. So we were having coffee. And we're just catching up on life, how her work was going. I was telling her about my work and about the community. And she shared with me, just sort of like in passing, this little anecdote about a way in which she and her friends have been convening people for conversation. And I listened to her, and I got like more and more like, so I'm from New York, so I'm an over talker, which is a very bad habit. Like, we think that you should start talking, at the last three words of this sentence, you should overlap and start. So I was doing my utmost not to overtalk Grace. But as she described what they were doing, Symposium, and I'm going to ask her to describe that next, I was like, my jaw was dropping, and I'm like, Grace, do you realize that it was the symposium tradition that led to the Eucharist being formatted the way it is? And she was like, well, as a matter of fact, I didn't know that. I said, well, it's a good thing you know a theological geek who can share that with you. And so as we started talking about that, I thought, wow, so many of us are really committed to the young adults in our tradition, many of whom are kind of disconnected, or they're not even alienated. They're just kind of like not sure it's relevant. And when I heard what Grace was creating with her friend, I was like, wow, that's really cool. And I think people need to hear about this and think about this as another way that people are, making meaningful connections and really also talking over lines of difference, which is something that's gotten so hard in this culture. So, Grace, I would like you to just tell us the history of how you guys came up with the idea of Symposium and what Symposium looks like as you get together and you experience it together.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am very lucky in DC to be a member of a group of friends who are very interested in, Greco-Roman philosophy and history. And so I think one of my friends had just read the Symposium and was like, we all need to gather around a dinner table and make a deeply sumptuous meal and then have like a very serious conversation about like what passion looks like in the good life. I was like, that sounds exactly like something a bunch of, mid-20s people need to be doing right now this weekend. And we did. We made it in fact, a like black tie dinner party, black tie optional. 6 of us in our friend group each invited a guest, and we had it was based off of the original Symposium. So we had a really fruitful and interesting conversation about the nature of eros in the good life. And then we had so much fun with that we decided to do it monthly. Each of us gets to bring one guest. So we have about 12 people at a table. And we provide all of the food. Everyone brings a beverage. You dress up in your fanciest, nicest clothing. And you commit yourself to like sitting phone free from 7:45 for happy hour, late into like the early hours of the morning. And we've had really, really interesting topics over the years. Over the months, because we've been doing this for a little over a year. Sometimes we have conversations about like, what does it mean to protest in 2025? And sometimes we talk about like, what is the plight of young men and boys? That was the topic I suggested. What is the plight of young men and boys, and how do you solve for that? Our most recent one was, what is the role of vice in the good life? Which was so interesting and fruitful and felt like very human. But it's a really fun and generative way to spend a Friday or Saturday night with my friends and to invite other people into it. And I find some people don't always get that it's like a sit down dinner party and you have to be there at 7:45. We're kind of going to be annoyed with you if you're not there at 7:45. And other people are just like champing in the bit for an opportunity to dig deep into a question and ponder their own thoughts on it, and like carry that forward into the rest of their lives. It sometimes the topics of conversation haunt me a little bit because it's like I'll spend months thinking about them after we've wrapped up the party.
Grace, I'm so intrigued because every time that we as Catholics gather to celebrate the liturgy, we celebrate 2 liturgies in one, the liturgy of the Word and the liturgy of the Eucharist, nourishing ourselves both with Word and with sacrament. And what I'm hearing is that y'all there in DC through this symposium are just really doing exactly that, nourishing yourselves by the conversation that you're enjoying together, nourishing yourselves with a delightful meal together experience. I'm intrigued that young people are coming together around such an idea, such a concept, especially in light of how it is that Reverend Trish had mentioned that there are various young adults who are not sure whether faith is relevant. We refer to a lot of young adults these days as nuns, as not belonging to any religious tradition. I'm wondering, based on that, as part of your introduction, you talked about making various traditions your own. What can you tell us about how it is that you and other young people, through acts like the Symposium and through your reading of our faith and our tradition, are helping to make various traditions your own, to make them something that folks of your generation really can be nourished by?
Thank you, Jamie. That's a good question, and I have to lay my cards on the table a little bit here because I don't necessarily consider I've really struggled in the last few years because I don't necessarily consider myself a person of faith all the time. After in high school when I was running around with Trish, I was like, rah rah, I'm so excited to be part of the body of Christ. I'm so excited to be part of the church. And then I left that very comfortable environment and I realized oh, it's actually really hard to keep up a faith tradition in a vacuum. And I think that something that's important to realize about young people in the post-COVID period, in the period of social media and phones, is young people live in a world that's kind of like a panopticon, and you always feel like someone is watching and waiting for you to mess up. And whether that is the ultimate fear of being canceled one day or the ever-present fear of being called cringe by your peers, it's so present to so many young people. I think that really, for so many people, has prevented them from pursuing authentic and confusing and rich social but also spiritual lives. And so for me, I am so lucky to be part of a group of people that is interested in having challenging conversations about what it means to be a human being and also what it means to live a good life or the good life. I think that we as a sort of youth culture have really, for a lot of reasons, shied away from showing our cards because, if I'm currently in a period of redetermining what my relationship with faith is and with the church and with God, frankly. And it's kind of hard to go to all of my secular friends and be like, hey, I love Jesus. I bought a bunch of candles with, the Virgin Mary on them. I don't have anyone to talk to about this. And they're all like, I'm so lucky. They're all like, that's cool. Sometimes they have really, especially my closest friends have very good pointed questions for me about why do you want to return to the Catholic Church? Or what, is this about the church or is this about God? But I am so lucky that I'm in a community of people who are interested in having really challenging conversations and who trust each other to show up in those conversations really, really well. And so the Symposium is a little bit of creating a tradition of engendering trust in your peers to have challenging and sometimes very uncomfortable conversations, and to still know that they care about you. Mm-hmm. I don't know that a lot of people have relationships where they feel like they can be open and honest and that person will still want to show up and talk to them or text them the next day. So I don't know that totally answers your question, but that has been on my mind a little bit, and I really needed to confess a little bit to you.
I think great. That's so great, Grace, because I think what you're describing is the vulnerability of the generation and also their exposure. I was never exposed the way my young adult children who are your peers are exposed, and nor was I as vulnerable. I was vulnerable because I was kind of a chubby geek and I was teased. but I wasn't like, viciously pursued on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. I want to just like kind of pull back to an earlier topic, just for those people who are listening who might not understand what the symposium tradition is and the book and where it came from. Like, I know you could recreate for us a little a snapshot of what is this thing called symposium in the Greco-Roman world. But I'd love to hear you describe that for folks.
Totally. Yes. Good to get back to brass tacks on that. So Symposium, I have to confess something else. I've never read Plato's Symposium. But a symposium is the format of it is traditionally you would be laid out on couches or cushions on the ground, sort of leaning on each other, having a shared meal in the center. Typically, a lot of these meals would be accompanied by entertainment, dancing, singing, music. I think famously at the beginning of the symposium, Plato says, now send away the dancing boys and girls and let's have a serious conversation about Eros. But Trish, you may have to actually, as much more of a historian than me, you may have to fill in some of the blanks here. That's the most that I really know about it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, it was a gathering, and homes were designed in the elite, Roman and Grecian homes. They were designed to accommodate this kind of meal. So there was a big table, and you would recline. So for those who are listening who know the Judeo-Christian tradition, so in Judaism, the although we really should always be thoughtful about the word Jew because it didn't emerge until the 14th century, but in this Judean culture, they adapted symposiums. So they would gather in the same way, and they would be around a table. It would be men. And they would have the meal served and they would recline. So the Passover meal, as it eventually becomes more structured, is structured around this same sort of symposium gathering, right? So and so we hear in the Gospels, we hear the hints of this. So, Jesus was reclined at table, right? Or he's going into groups where people are gathered, right? So he's with the Pharisees and they're all gathered. Well, they're all gathered to have this kind of symposium conversation. And so it migrates into the world of the Judean culture, and then it becomes part of the Christian culture because now Jesus has done this imperative, right? Because they were all reclined in the upper room sharing the Passover, right? And do this in memory of me becomes a format for which the new people who are emerging, the people of the way, who are followers of Jesus, but still completely connected to the temple observations, and eventually when the temple falls, the emergence of the synagogues, they too are gathering at table and they are, passing the cup, so we hear, when we look at the Last Supper, the cup that Jesus blessed is probably the fourth cup of the Passover meal as it's being passed. So this symposium tradition of the elite Greco-Roman world of coming together becomes part of who we are. And of course, then it gets expanded because then as people are brought into the Christian community, the followers of the way, and later they'll be called the Christians, right? The followers of Jesus. There's a big communal meal that starts happening, an agape meal, usually in the courtyard of one of these large homes. Where food can be shared freely. How do we know this? Because Paul tells us how stingy they all were. We have Paul dressing down the community like, everybody gets fed, right? That's a different meal than the Eucharistia, which is that meal that happens in what would have been the symposium room of a large home. So, when you were describing this, I thought, oh my gosh, this is what the early Christians were doing. They were getting together. They were asking the same question. They were asking the question, what does it mean to be a human being? And what does it mean in the teaching of our great Rabbi Jesus, who is telling us fundamentally who we're supposed to be in relationship to one another? And we discuss it and we learn and we bring our friends to hear more. I love that everyone brings somebody. because that's what happened in the early church. I'm an early church. I'm a vendor in the market, and Jamie keeps coming, and he's so nice to me, even though I'm of a different class. I started talking to him. I'm like, well, what's up with you? Okay, maybe we wouldn't say that in that vernacular, but Jesus. Then Jamie might say, well, I'm part of the way. Do you want to come hear what we're about, right? So it's so there's such a beautiful parallel, and it just struck me that first of all, I want other young adults in my life to know, well, you could do this, you know because the invitation, come to Caris, come to church, come to Holy Family, whatever, that's not the invitation. The invitation is, how do you find like a depth of relationship and love and meaning? How do you be, this is a very intellectually engaged generation. It's a really remarkable generation. They have more information in and around them than like humanity has ever had. So when you were talking about it over at Smith Coffee, I was like, wow. So Jamie, what's your reaction when you hear about like what Grace is doing in our history? And I know that you're in a beautiful community of people, and I know that you face some of the challenges and obstacles that I face. I don't want to overly essentialize Grace as the token young person who's going to tell us all about it. But on the other hand, we've got her, and she's got a great perspective. So Jamie, what are your thoughts as you listen to all of this?
What I'm loving about what I'm hearing is the tie to our Christian tradition. That is to say, my mind bends toward the early Christian communities that gathered together at sunrise to share a loaf of bread and a cup of wine. And the very etymology of the word symposium comes from the Greek sum, with, posis, drinking together. And so there's just something about this powerful thing of reviving this tradition of the classic Greek symposium of people coming together to drink together and to have really robust conversations to what it is that we as Christians do every time we gather. Every time we gather, we have a conversation. We get to know others. We're sort of like the young people in their symposium, inviting in others ideally to be able to be nourished in various ways, whether it's through word and or through sacrament, to be able to go out and to better companion other people. I think that's the other word that's really on my heart right now is companion. Comes to us from a Latin root, essentially meaning to share bread with another person. And what I'm hearing and what it is that you're doing, Grace, is that you all are in a very real way being companions to one another. And if I might share another observation, it sounds a little old fashioned what y'all are doing, this tradition, because so many young people today, any public place I go into, there are all sorts of young people on their phones, on their devices, right? Even during Mass, it is not uncommon for me to see young children on their devices. It's become a new way of pacifying children, teenagers, persons of all ages. So for y'all to make this conscious decision that, okay, we're going to put away our devices and be present to one another, face to face, that to me just seems like a very radical thing to be doing in our world today.
I think that's so sort of, I feel that very, very presently as well. And I think it's important for us to talk about phones here in two ways. When you say it's a way of pacifying people, I think that's really quite right. I do not know a single person, but in particular, especially like a single young person who is happy about their relationship with their phone. The young people, and maybe I live in like Washington, D.C., where people are totally weirdo freaks, which is definitely true, but everyone I know is looking for an off-ramp with their phone. They're buying dumb phones. They're like paying $75 a month for a course about how to get off of your phone, which I find very funny. They're working on, if they can't get off their phone, they're like writing long form articles to post to their 5 friends on Substack. People are really looking for ways to re-engage with other people in real life and re-engage with the real world around them. And I am really glad to see that, because I think that phones were a huge promise of connection for people. And you're right. I see so many young people who are sitting in the same room with each other. sitting in the same room with each other on their phones, which is even better than the real norm, which is canceling plans to stay at home and sit on your phone. You know, like at least you get out of your house, but it is so easy to put on TikTok, put on Instagram, get on Facebook and just scroll, or Twitter and just scroll endlessly, which I think is a real thing that prevents us from having these fruitful and challenging conversations and fruitful and challenging relationships with people. And there are really perverse incentives here as well. Tech companies, when we talk about young people, quote unquote, protecting their peace and cutting out toxic people from their lives, you cut out enough toxic people, you don't have any more friends. What do? You stay on TikTok all day. Like, there's a real perverse incentive for content about antisocial behavior to be pushed up the algorithm to young people, because that makes more money for tech companies. And so I am really, really heartened that young people understand just how much they're being manipulated, and are really looking for connection and like generative conversation. But I also think, and I'm really interested in your perspective on this as well, like what I see with young people who have grown up with social media and a really secular world and a lot of content about many times the damaging relationships people have with religious institutions is a parallel track of young people who are flocking towards, especially traditional Catholic practice, Orthodox practice. I have my own theories about that, but I'm interested in each of your theories.
Well, my response, I'll be curious to hear what Jamie's is, we live in an age of tremendous uncertainty. We're forget what's going on all over, the political issue, which we're going to bracket. Global warming. I knew people in my daughter's generation who were questioning whether they should have children, because what is the planet going to be like? So if you live in a time of, grave uncertainty, then any form of religion that gives you the comfort of something very black and white is, I think, really attractive. And the truth is that Roman Catholicism had that for a long time. In the church that I was born right as the Second Vatican Council was convened. But I've heard a lot about this from my mom and my elders, right? They were taught that if they got, Jamie, you might remember what these moments were. If you got to church by I think it was the beginning of the first reading, and you stayed through the Eucharist or whatever, it counted. Right? Because you had to fulfill your Sunday obligation or you were going to hell. So like for my grandparents in the Bronx, they had to make sure they went to confession, because you couldn't die with sin on your soul. God only knows what Becca and Grandma were sinning doing. I can't really think of what it could have been. And then if you fulfilled your Sunday obligation, you were kind of safe for the next week. So it was like a certainty. And I think the rise of fundamentalism in the United States and all over the globe in all its forms is really about the comfort of certainty. I'm saved by Jesus Christ, my personal Lord and Savior. And once I've made that commitment, I'm cool. It doesn't matter what else happens to me. I'm good, right? So groups like, religious practitioners like Jamie in his location, me, everybody in the ECC, to invite people into God as a mystery is a very different invite. And it does not offer the kind of security that the Eucharist is a mystery, the body of Christ is a mystery. It is really, ultimately, our theologians. I remember reading about the Trinity and this big monster book. It's probably behind me. You can see what geeks Jamie and I are. We got a lot of books. This book on the Trinity by Walter Casper, not exactly a screaming leftist, right? And by the end, like 20 pages from the end, Casper says, well, ultimately, it's all a mystery. I just wanted to throw the book across the room. I remember teasing the professor, like, oh, great, we just marched through 500 pages of hard theology to land at it's a mystery. But, I think that's part of it. Are we offering a mystery? The other thing is, like, are we offering solace? So for example, like the people who are drawn to the conservative Roman Catholic churches, like, is there silence? Is there places where they can relax into the quiet, to not be dominated by the phone? Jamie, that was a lot for me. Jamie, what do you think? It's a great question.
Mystery is such a difficult thing for us to wrestle with. And I love it because mystery comes from a Greek word essentially meaning to keep the mouth shut. The more that we talk about things that are mysterious, as Walter Casper, I'm sure, would agree, the more wrong we get it. And so there's just something fascinating about how it is that young people, in the case of the Symposium, are coming together and talking about issues of the faith. I remember when I was in the seminary now 35 years ago, this was in the wake of our implementation of Vatican II reforms. We just found it so invigorating. In fact, in the seminary, we did not pray glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit. We prayed glory be to you, source of all being, eternal word and Holy Spirit. It was just this very progressive sense. But at the same time, when we looked at the national, international level, we could see this real backlash to those reforms and this desire for certainty, for clearer answers, for dispelling the mystery and instead giving us a nice anchor. I'm thinking of the theological virtue of hope, which is pictured as an anchor. People are looking for something that will anchor them in their faith. Every time we say the word amen as Catholics and as Christians, I'm made to think of the Hebrew root from which that word comes, which literally means I will drive my tent stake into that. What we have just prayed together is so solid that I will drive my tent stake. I will stake my life on what it is that we have just said. And I just sense that so many young people, at least when I was in the seminary, instead of reflecting on these great mysteries of life and leaving them as the mystery that they are and just being quiet about them, there's something about us as human beings that wants to just hold something in our hands and understand it. And I'm fascinated by how it is that some people tend more in that direction of seeing the world more black and white, and others of us see the world in all sorts of shades that can be characterized as one or the other.
So you heard the answer from your theologian pastors, and I love that you are joining us in a mutual dialogue. You're demonstrating Symposium, Grace,
are we in a
by
dialectic?
asking a question. What do you think? What do you think? Like some people who have been drawn back to that more. There's a reverence, there's a transcendence in traditional Catholicism that's sometimes not as present in, like where you grew up, Pax Christi, the sanctuary looks like a ski lodge, let's face it. What do you think? What do you think draws people?
That's so I'm fully in sort of concord with both of you. You really took the words right out of my mouth. I think that I have to show my millennialness. Have either of you watched Fleabag? Oh, okay. Well, you should. You should. Fleabag's great. The second season is about a young woman falling in love with her priest, and she has this great monologue at the end. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who she's talking to him. She's in a confessional, and she's like, I want someone to tell me when to wake up in the morning and what to wear and who to love and how to get dressed. And I agree. I think we live in these unprecedented times. We do. We live in times of both, great features of, the Protestant Reformation, which ushered in liberalism and widespread literacy and people's self-interpretation of the Bible and of religious texts. But with that comes, oh no, suddenly I have to know how to make every choice for myself, and I have to determine what my morality and my ethics are. And if I'm wrong, maybe I'm going to go to hell. That seems really scary. And so I agree. I think people are craving a sense of certainty and craving a sense of sureness. And I am very sympathetic to that, but I also worry about, do you end up being stagnant? And I think something I really struggle with as an adult seeking a home in faith communities is that you're right. Pax Christi was not bells and smells, it does look like a ski lodge. And I feel really at home there. And I step into other Catholic churches and I'm like, where am I? What am I doing? What's going on? Because it feels so much more like a removal from, for good reason, often a removal from like my earthly life.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be elevated. It's supposed to be different. It asks you to step out of your comfort zone. And then I'm like, oh, shocked that I'm kind of uncomfortable when I'm there, because it's unfamiliar. And so I really agree. I think people are looking for transcendence and people are looking for comfort, but they are not comforted by the things that I'm comforted by, which is like Christian mysticism and the mystery of it, and like Julian of Norwich being like, it's all gonna be okay. They're comforted by, I mean, we see this outside of religious contexts too. Like rigidity and restriction feels like control. This is why people go on the carnivore diet, because or become like raw vegans, because restriction feels like control in a world and a life that you really don't control.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And in a world where you feel out of control, or in a world where like you feel like you have way too many choices. Way too many choices, right? I feel that sometimes. And I wish the fourth person on this call was my mom. So when we first started Karis, we were meeting up in that space on Washington Avenue, which was just like a big room, right? And a number of elders were with us. So it was Mom, Mary Jo, Terry, whatever. And one of the things that was very healing for them is they had been raised in that solely transcendent church, that rule laden church. And the truth is that they felt crippled by it. And it had a deep, deep shadow side that they were concerned nobody was really talking about, that there was a kind of just like happy reclamation of that era, when in fact that era had so many oppressions and left people so hamstrung and so unable to make moral decisions on their own, to exercise what later Vatican II will talk about as the primacy of conscience, right? And just watching them bond, these three women, over it wasn't so fun, everybody, right? So how do you reclaim, it just calls the question of like, how do you reclaim the truth about, what the mystery of God, which is that God is transcendent, beyond all knowing, speaks to us in images. And I remember walking into Old St. Pat's in Chicago, which is like a Celtic Easter egg. I'm not kidding you. The whole thing is covered with Celtic, chains and symbols and saints. And it's like, I mean, I remember sitting there, like, I was like blown away. I was like, oh, I'm going up with the ancestors right this minute because it's so beautiful. And like, what is that transcendence that's available in those spaces, whatever, but what's that immanence that when you and I and Mom and Dad and our kids used to all come together in our quasi ski lodge with the green carpet, that we felt like we could talk and we could put our arms around each other and we could, tease each other's kids and whatever, and then turn to the reverence when that opening song started. We were never irreverent there, right? We were very reverent, but we were also at home. We were in our family room. And what is the tension, right, between that horizontal and that vertical? It's, I think a lot of us are wondering about that. Yeah. Jamie, you've got a beautiful traditional space in the tradition of the Southwest. I mean, what do you think as people kind of come to Holy Family, into your space where I have prayed and been with you?
I think now more than ever, community is just so important. What I'm hearing in your ski lodge stories is how it is that that it brought together a real community where people really felt, that sense of family and belonging and identity. And I sense even now here in Texas, amid ice raids and chaos at so many different levels, people are thirsting for that sense of safety and security and stability. at a time when all of that seems upended. That's why, Grace, I'm just intrigued to know how it is that millennials are, say, approaching so many of the things that are swirling in our world. Are just, for those of us who have more experience in life than millennials, and we can see it against the backdrop of many decades of life experience in these United States of America, how it is that y'all are processing this. This morning, I published a book called A Light in Darkness, where I took all of my Substack articles during Advent and Christmas and brought them together into a book, simply reflecting on how it is that, the Advent and Christmas challenge is for us to see light breaking into darkness. I don't want to be a pessimist or bring this conversation down, but it's certainly a lived reality that is impacting us and our communities, especially here in Texas, and I'm imagining in other places too. How do millennials process this, especially in light of this? Say, the desire for certainty, the chaos of these times does not make that easy. How does one live one's faith in the concrete context of one's existence, of one's community, one's state, one's nation, one's world? How are millennials processing this, Grace, do you imagine?
I unfortunately am not going to bring the conversation up to a more hopeful place. Obviously, I can't speak for all millennial and Gen Z people. What I see primarily is a real sense of numbing, is a real belief that like nothing's ever going to get better and everything's just about as bad as it can be. And I'm very sympathetic to that. I think things are really bad. I think people are very disengaged. I mean, and I'll say too, when it comes to like real moments of deep crisis, I think there's a real coming together of a lot of people. We see this in Minnesota right now, just to allude to our own issues on the ground there. But and that's been really warming and heartening. But I fear that people are for the most part really disengaged. They're mad about it. They have taken to social media to express their anger, but there's like that's just people sending around the same 10 infographics. And I think that's a sense like people are really trying to self-soothe. And sometimes we self-soothe ourselves out of action. What I will say, which is a little bit more hopeful, is I have not seen that to be universal. The Yale School of Divinity has a great podcast called For the Life of the World or something. And they have a really wonderful series on social isolation, loneliness, and solitude that I've been like mainlining these days for just a little injection of feeling better. But they talk about how do you break people out of these cycles of isolation? We talk and think so much about how do we make it easier for people to do the things that they want to do? How do we make it easier for people to have the sort of like friendships and social relationships that they want? And I think when you extrapolate out of that, people feel a sense of stagnancy and a sense of real lack of agency in most areas of their lives, if they're Gen Z or millennial, for good reasons. And I think sometimes for like a little bit of making excuses, but we can get into that at a different time. What many people on the Yale Divinity School's podcast have said, who are researchers of social isolation, have said it needs to be people who have strong social lives and feel like they have agency in their lives and feel like they have control and are engaged in their communities. Those people have a real social obligation and a real spiritual obligation to do outreach to people who are struggling and not the other way around. You can't just put the onus on people who are struggling to find a way to magically make their situations better. And so I was sitting in my house the other day feeling totally sorry for myself, thinking like, oh, it's going to be Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I have nothing to volunteer. I never give back to the community. I feel so terrible all the time. My friend immediately texted me. She's like, I'm hosting, like apropos of nothing. She's like, I'm hosting a volunteer event on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. do you want to come? And I was like, oh, okay, yes, absolutely, miraculous. This is great. But she is a highly agentic person who decided that she wanted to host something and then reached out to everybody. And so many people showed up. And so I think that one of the ways you empower people to do it is by demonstrating that it is possible to take the reins, even in a small way, and then invite them until they accept, and then keep inviting them until they realize that they also have the power to do that.
That's so awesome. I'm really struck by that. But, I'm really also struck by the language you used about numbing and soothing. I want to say something about that because a lot of people who listen to this podcast are pastor people, right? They're lay leaders or they're ordained. And we had a really great pair of guests on to talk about addiction recovery and how do we help people in our communities who might be facing that. And one of the emerging addictions in this culture that is not getting talked about a lot here in the US, although it is really talked about in Korea and Japan, is tech addiction. And I'd like to just say something about that for our listeners. Someone I love very dearly in my life became addicted to multiplayer games. And in the course of that, I ended up going to a program for the people who love people who are addicted to technology. And as I sat with, and it was a blended group, so there were people who were struggling with addiction, and then there were parents, friends, spouses. It's called Online Gamers Anonymous, OLGA. So if you know someone in your life, listener, who is having an issue, go check that out, Olga. People were addicted to solitaire, Sudoku, were about to lose their jobs over playing these games on their computers too much. People were there because they were so addicted to social media that it was costing them their relationship with their spouse because all they did was scroll. People were there because they were all of their community was virtual and they had no real life people. I mean, I know that people who are on Steam and whatever are real life people. And, I know it's not all shadow, but there is a shadow. And that's this danger of the serotonin squirts in our brain that we get through using these things. And I have to say, like you're talking about I'm like ready for the $75 course on how to get off your phone. All right. So you confessed early, I'll confess late in the podcast. I am doom scrolling. I sit there and I'm like, I get into the vortex of one thing leading to another. And I've really had to look at that, particularly in recent weeks. So I just want to put that in the mix for us, for the pastoral folks, that this is a real issue. And, if someone comes to you and they're feeling overwhelmed by someone's technology use, that's something we need to take as seriously as if someone came and said, my spouse, my kid, whatever, are drinking too much, taking drugs, whatever. It's a pretty grave problem in this country. And the reason I mentioned Japan and Korea is they have treatment now. There's a lot of treatment. There's almost no treatment in the United States yet. Well, Jamie, we've had Grace for quite a while now. It's been an amazing conversation. What are your final thoughts or questions for our very essentialized but very brilliant young adult friend in DC?
Grace, so very grateful to you for coming on and helping to open our eyes for those of us who are listening and learning for the first time about this idea of Symposium, of young people coming together and having very robust conversations. I just really appreciate your willingness to do that because, after all, that's what our Christian faith tradition is based on. People coming together, sharing a loaf of bread, sharing a cup of wine, sharing stories of who we are and where we're going and the hopes that we have, and are trying to make sense of mystery in life. And so to see young people doing this, it gives me hope in the midst of so many challenges in our world, to see young people coming together and dialoguing, even across lines of difference, right? We don't always agree with those around us. And I'm imagining that that's one of the beauties of the symposium as well, is seeing how it is that, there are just various perspectives on the same issue, and that enriches our own experience and our own perspectives. So really, really appreciate your willingness to share that with us. Reverend Trish, final words, and then we'll
Yeah,
give Grace the last chance.
the power of conversation, like the dynamism of what we're doing right now. It's like, back and forth. Oh, wait, I have a question for you. Oh, well, I think this. Oh, well, okay, yeah, but let me develop that this way, or let me push back on that. That I remember when I invited you, Grace, saying, well, it's just the dance of conversation on this podcast. That's our commitment. It's like, we're just going to get interesting people on with us. We're going to talk. And the danger of like some of these platforms is it's not that dynamic give and take. There's no opportunity halfway through some crazy diatribe to say, okay, hold on for a minute. I haven't finished my thought. Really important for over talkers like Trish Fani. So, that we want to be in the dance of conversation with each other, and really also to honor, that people, that this is a human heart longing to be together and to talk. Like, Plato wrote about it because people were doing it thousands of years ago, right? And we've never lost that. Our dinner tables are so precious. What are we doing? How do we encourage our communities to make dinner a time that you really connect with each other? How do we make sure that when people come in to our spaces, that they feel like there's space for them to talk and to be heard? So, whether or not people ever find their way back to churches, we have something really important to listen to from this generation, the heart's longing and also where it's satisfied. So you gave us so many golden nuggets, Grace, and I knew you would. So you get to have the last word, though. So what's your final observation in this dance conversation?
Oh, well, thank you so much, number one, for giving me an opportunity to chat with both of you. Even if I had said nothing of interest, this was great and really, really fun and exciting. But I think my final thoughts are, people are really curious and hungry, and people are not good at maybe identifying that in themselves, and they're really not good at bringing it out to other people proactively. And so the more that all of us can do who have a good relationship with our own curiosity, the more that all of us can do to press on people and draw them out of themselves and tell them that it is safe and okay to think and wonder out loud with other people, I think that we should feel called to do that work, because I think that a lot of people just don't realize that's something that they can do until it's presented to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the way you emphasize agency is spot on. So, Jamie, you want to close it down?
Well said. Thank you, Grace Curtis. Appreciate very much your opening our eyes and our hearts to the symposium and how it is that you and other young people are coming together to be nourished and to nourish one another. We also thank all of our listeners. Thank you for joining Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. I'm Father Jamie Mathias.
And I am Reverend Trish Sullivan-Vani.
Let's build community.
Amen.
Thank you for joining us for Cutting Edge Catholics, a podcast of renewal, reconstruction, and resistance. For more information on inclusive Catholicism, please visit extraordinarycatholics.faith. Keep the faith.